good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to all of you who've joined us. And I just wanted to welcome you officially to our Beauty Sector Wellness Spotlight. And we have the honor of having two topics, and it's going to be very important, and I'll tell you about that. The first one is, what are the connections between how people think about beauty and wellness, with Dr. Anjon Chatterjee. And the next topic is, what's changed in the beauty sector since COVID. And I want to tell you that we debated, should we have one or the other, and we decided we're going to have both, because what's so important is that those of you who are on this call, that we learn from the research that Dr. Chatterjee is bringing to us. And Dr. Chatterjee is interested in learning from those of us on the call about what's happening in the beauty sector, because he is in an academic sector and in a medical sector. So this is an opportunity for us to learn from a different arena, and I think actually it's a very important one that comes together. So my name is Susie Ellis. For those of you who don't know me, I'm chair and CEO of the GWS and the nonprofit Global Wellness Institute, and I will be your host today. And I did want to mention that we have a sponsor today, Natura Bissé. We'll hear a little bit more from them later in the session, because they'll contribute to the discussion. They're out of Barcelona, and many of you know them, very high-end skincare product line that is a big supporter of the Global Wellness Summit and the Global Wellness Institute. So thank you for that, Beatrice. I also want to mention just briefly that we have a few other people from the Global Wellness Summit or Global Wellness Institute on the call. Michelle Gamble is here with us, and you already met Beatrice. And Nancy Davis is the Chief Creative Officer and Executive Director of both the GWS and GWI. We work so closely together. So Nancy, I'd love for you to say hello and whatever else you might want to say to start.
Thank you, Susie. I just want to say welcome. You know, so much has been written about beauty and is talked about beauty, but I think today's conversation might be a whole new chapter, and I'm very excited to hear about it. I want to thank you all for being here and supporting all of our virtual events. It means a great deal to all of us, and I hope to you. So let's have fun. Back to you, Susie.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nancy. And Nancy's going to be watching the chat, because I usually find that I don't have time to watch the chat, but the chat is very important because we want you to contribute in the chat, and she will bring to my attention whatever might come up in the chat that should be discussed amongst the group. And by the way, we send you the chat afterwards. I think that's really important, because there are people you might want to connect with, ideas that people contribute, because I sent out an email to a lot of you about what is, new because of COVID in the beauty industry. So we're not going to hear from everyone, but you can put in the chat whatever you feel you're seeing. And then that will be valuable for everyone, even beyond just this call, but also when they review the video and the chat. So let's get started. And Beatrice, go ahead and show the next slide to give us a little grounding for this conversation. And the next slide is the famous bubble chart. The global wellness economy, this is the latest chart. You'll see mental wellness has been added, because that was added in November at our Global Wellness Summit from 2020. And the $4.5 trillion market, and you see the bubbles. For those of you who are new, I'll just let you know that the size of the circles is the size of the revenue per year that is generated from this sector. And it's very important today with our topic of beauty that you'll notice the personal care, beauty, and anti-aging bubble is the largest. It is huge. It's actually over 1 trillion. and it dwarfs a lot of other bubbles like the spa economy, the thermal mineral springs, workplace wellness, wellness real estate. So it's a really important topic that we're going to talk about today. And by the way, we are updating the entire bubble chart this year. It will be presented at our summit in Tel Aviv in November. The researchers are busy doing this, and it's so important because it's going to be on the year 2020, which will, of course, include COVID. So it'll be interesting to see, did the beauty bubble get larger, smaller? What about wellness tourism? Well, we're pretty sure that one got smaller, but wellness real estate looks like it's gotten bigger. So those are very important numbers, but so that grounds us a little bit, and this is all available on the Global Wellness Institute website, so feel free to download these, and they're accessible. So, okay, let me now I have the privilege of introducing Dr. Anjon Chatterjee. Dr. Chatterjee is a professor of neurology, psychology, and architecture, and he's the founding director of the Pennsylvania Center for Neuroaesthetics, which is actually new, 2 years old. He wrote The Aesthetic Brain, How We Evolve to Desire Beauty and Enjoy Art. And Dr. Chatterjee, I still have your book right there, right here in my bookcase, because it's one of my favorites. And he actually left his chair of neurology at Penn Hospital to found this Penn Center for Neuroaesthetics, which is very exciting. And I'm going to have him talk a little bit about that. Very quickly, Dr. Chatterjee, I'm just going to tell the story of how we met. We met at a TED Med conference, and it was in 2016. And there he is. There he was, TED Med 2016. It was in California. And the topic of his talk was how your brain decides what is beautiful. And before his talk, I had gone through the book section where they were displaying books from different speakers, and I came across his book on the aesthetic brain, and I immediately purchased it because being in the spa and wellness arena, I thought, wow, this is, fascinating. And then also there was the way they described his talk with the tantalizing question, why is beauty so gripping? And so I thought, well, I can't wait for the talk. Well, I sat there, his 18 minutes or whatever they give you at TED, and I knew immediately that we need to ask Dr. Chatterjee to join us at a future Global Wellness Summit and to become, to teach us and be part of what we're doing. And when I approached him, what I realized and what he said to me, well, I'm not from the beauty world. I'm, an academic, a medical doctor, I'm in a whole different arena. But we both sense that these arenas need to talk with one another, and there can be a lot of value because he deals in research and we deal in revenue and, what people are telling us and studies and surveys, but the two together could really, could really do something. So next slide, Beatrice. I just want to show you, and Dr. Chatterjee will really want to hear a little bit more about this Penn Center for Neuroaesthetics. It's the only one in the world. It is doing already amazing things, and I think the people on this call should know about it and will want to know about it, but how would we know if we don't hear from someone about what is this? What is neuroaesthetics and where is this going? Because it's not just about beauty in terms of facial beauty or body beauty. It is also about art and architecture. And that's something that our global wellness world is also interested in. So with that introduction, it is my privilege, and I think Dr. Chatterjee, you'll have to unmute yourself. And I just look forward to what you have to share with us. And it's great to see you again because it's been quite a while since the pandemic and all. Dr. Chatterjee?
Thank you, Susie, for that very nice introduction. What Susie neglected to say is that after the TED Med conference, she accosted me in a plane, which is how we met.
That is very true. I was so anxious to meet Dr. Chatterjee, and after his talk, of course, everybody was coming up and I didn't have a chance, but happily and coincidentally, he was on the same plane that I was on after leaving Palm Springs, and I saw him on the plane. So yes, I made my move.
It's also a delight to be talking to you again. I think the last time I was really engaged with the global wellness, at least the summer institute, was in Italy. So it's been a little bit of time. And some of what I'm going to say will broadly be familiar to those of you who have heard me talk before, but I think also touch on a few new things. So the first point I'd like to make is when we're talking about beauty, the question that comes up is beauty of what? And as Susie mentioned, at my center, one way we organize this is to think about how our brain organizes the visual world. And so we organize our visual world into people, places, and things. And so we are interested in yeah, we're probably not ready for the slide yet, but I'll tell you when it would be appropriate. We organize our world into people, places, and things, and we're interested in the beauty of people, places, and things, or the aesthetic experiences of those. And one could easily talk about each of those and ask the question is, what is the relationship between those and wellness? And the way that connection and conversation would play out might be somewhat different. I'm struck a little bit by, I always love looking at those bubble charts that you guys put out, but I'm always struck about a bubble that is not there. And I don't know if that's because it doesn't have the same economic heft or whether it's because questions aren't asked about that. And that's around arts and culture. And part of the reason I bring this up is that the World Economic Forum has started an arts and culture section to which I have been invited, but there is at that level of global economies, people are really thinking about arts and culture as its own entity. And so again, I don't know if that bubble doesn't exist because people haven't asked the question, or at least so far, it is such a small portion that it doesn't show up in relative to the other sectors. So having said that, I'd like to focus on, when we talk about beauty, for example, if we're talking about faces or people, since that for the cosmetic industry is certainly a big piece of beauty. One thing we know is that people's responses to facial beauty are automatic. And we have published information on this where our brains respond to beauty, even when people are not explicitly thinking about beauty. And the way we think about the biologic expression of facial beauty is that when in the brain, parts of our visual system that is responsive to faces and parts of our brains that are responsive to rewards and pleasure, when those are simultaneously activated, that is the biology of our experience of beauty, right? So vision and pleasure simultaneously ends up being our experience of beauty. Now, it turns out that the brain is also very sloppy in its assignment of values. We are not very good about being very precise about what we value. And what that means is that something that the ancient Greeks talked about, which is core values around which our lives orbit, are beauty, goodness, and truth. And around those, there's less work on truth, but certainly beauty and goodness, we tend to conflate all the time. And so psychologists, social psychologists have shown how, attractive people, get all sorts of advantages in life, that they are hired more easily, they are given higher pay if they commit infractions, they're given less punishments, and so on. And it turns out that there is probably a biologic basis for this, which is that in our brains, when we make values of morality and value and aesthetic valuation, very similar structures are engaged. And so we're not very precise in that. And that can be both a force for good and a force for bad. We also have data to suggest that people that have minor facial anomalies, and some of this work was funded through the Global Wellness Institute, that we also have a stereotype of people being with, say, scars or blemishes or birthmarks, that people tend to think of them as being less intelligent, less trustworthy, less competent, and so on. So the relationship between beauty and wellness turns out is complicated. And just to throw in there, we have new data that we just finished collecting that suggests the direction goes it's bidirectional, so that good people are also viewed as being more attractive. So when I typically talk about this, people get very depressed about it, but it actually works both ways. So if you want to appear more attractive to other people, if you are also convincingly a good person, they will view you as more attractive. And I think this comports with many of our individual experiences, where you might meet someone for the first time and you have an initial response to whether you think they're attractive or not. But as you get to know them, depending on what you think about their personality, people often really physically feel like they get more or less attractive depending on that. And we have evidence to suggest that that intuition is actually correct. So going to wellness, one thing to think about is what do we actually mean by wellness? And again, going back to the Greeks, you can go back to Aristotle, and he made a distinction between what he called hedonia and eudaimonia. And hedonia is what we think of as pleasure. Eudaimonia is often talked about as wellness or well-being or flourishing or thriving, the kinds of ideas that is in common parlance today. And so when we come to facial beauty, the link to pleasure is fairly clear, but the link to wellness, thriving, flourishing is less clear. And in some ways, I think that's a real challenge to confront. So one way, while we have done different kinds of experiments and brain research on this, another way to get at this is try to understand, how do we think about the concepts of beauty and wellness? And one way to do that is to try to crowdsource this, and crowdsource this in a way that you get people's responses and then use fairly complicated statistical methods, which I confess not to personally understand, but I basically hire smart people to do this for me. But what I'm going to show you is the basic question of how do we think about beauty? How do we think about wellness? Are they connected? Does this vary by gender? Or do men think about these differently than women? And do these vary by age cohorts? So Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, and boomers, right? And so that's a little bit of data that I'm going to show you and make some final observations. And I will be just as interested in what you think about this. These data are not published, they're under review right now. So, okay, so maybe now's a good time for that first slide. Okay, so what we did here was using people who, some colleagues who do computational linguistics, is we looked at 10 years of Google News. So this is published work, and basically asked the question of what are words that behave very similarly to beauty? What are words that behave very similarly to wellness? And what are words that co-occur for beauty and wellness? And to kind of give you an intuition about this, this is basically the idea is that birds of a feather flock together. So words, for example, if you look under beauty, the way beauty shows up in writing, that first word there, passion, often shows up in similar ways. So in similar syntactic forms, in similar associations for the words around this. So this is very much of a data-driven way of approaching this with the ideas, what are the terms that get associated with these targets of beauty and wellness? And so what we did is we took the top 15 of each of these and then did what was, I mentioned, this cloud sourcing way of looking at this. And so the way this is done, it's done online, which you show an individual word, and people are given a minute to just write down as many words that they associate with the target words. And so rather than using published work, now we are looking prospectively, collecting prospective data, and people are just telling you what it is, what the set of words are, that are associated with these terms. And from that, we can derive a set of correlations, which is, if beauty and stunning both evoke the same kinds of words, they're going to be more closely related in semantic space than say something like beauty and education, for example, although I'll come back to that particular one. So it turns out that this is a way that we can look at this. And if you go to the next slide, please. And this is to show you across all of the participants there, I think close to 500 participants that we did in this. So it shows you how these concepts so on the right is wellness, and you can see all of the blue nodes, which were the words associated with wellness, kind of cluster around that central node. Go back. Yeah, and similarly for beauty, it turns out that the words that we thought might serve as bridge terms doesn't actually do that. And there are a few terms that were more associated with beauty, and this seems to link up to wellness as well. Next slide, please. So to get into this a little bit, the words that were most closely associated with beauty were the following: stylish, attraction, elegance, aesthetic, sexy, alluring, curvy, lovely, gorgeous, feminine. And so at least this combination of using Google News and then prospectively outsourcing, these are the words that are most similar in people's minds when they're thinking about beauty. Now we have other data here, other data that I'm not showing here, showing there are some differences. For example, elegance is a term that seems to become more salient as people get older. So if you're marketing something to an older population, elegance is probably a better descriptor than sexy, which sexy tends to go towards people who are younger. So there are some age differences in how these get associated to beauty, but for this purpose, they're all very, the most closely aligned with beauty. Next slide, please. And for wellness, these are the words, and I just broke them into 3 broad categories on the right. And this was just me looking at them, which is spiritual, mindfulness, holistic, are kind of these sort of elevated kind of holistic notions. Then there's leisure, lifestyle, thrive, aerobics, fitness. These are more of these active lifestyle sorts of associations. And then health and nutrition ones, so medical health, nutrition, freshness, which we think has to do with food, and delicious also having to do with food. Next slide. So when we broadly look at women versus men, a couple of, here's one thing that pops out, which is that women associate education with beauty in a way that men don't. And we don't really know what that means, whether education perhaps is a proxy for intelligence, and I want to be clear, I'm not saying that it is in fact a proxy for intelligence. There are many, many very smart people who don't have a lot of formal education. And I certainly know many people who have a lot of education that maybe are not as smart as they think they are. But nonetheless, there does seem to be this association with education and beauty for women in a way that doesn't occur for men. Next slide, please. And for wellness, one thing that strikes me is that men associate talent with wellness in a way that women don't. And whether this has to do with men's preoccupation with their occupations, whether that has something to do with it, I don't know, but these are what the data are showing. Next slide, please. So, and I could continue to do that for each of the generations, but it's easier to read in a paper than in this kind of presentation. So I'm just going to leave you with some of our conclusions in these studies, which is, I want to start out by just saying it is a challenge to connect beauty, when we're talking about physical beauty, to eudaimonia. To pleasure, it's pretty clear. One thing that we find when you create these semantic networks is that you can, there are mathematical ways to show how structured these concepts are. And what we find is women have more structured concepts of beauty and wellness than men, and older people tend to have more structured concepts of beauty and wellness than younger people. As I mentioned in that one slide, women link education closely to beauty, men link talent and freshness closely to wellness. And the generational things, which I didn't show you any of those images, boomers also link education more closely to beauty. The youngest group link delicious close to wellness. Perhaps there's more of an attention to food when people are at that age, or at least the pleasure of food. And then we find both the millennials and Gen Xers link talent closely to wellness. And I wonder, this is me speculating, is those are the kind of prime work generations that, people who are right in the thick of their careers, whether talent then gets associated with wellness. And then the older cohorts link vibrancy and individuality closely to wellness, and that very well may be that people are starting to get much more concerned about their health at that time. So these are just some observations from the data, and that's all I have to say for now.
Thank you, Dr. Chatterjee. Fascinating. And I'm sure there are questions about whether or not maybe people could access the slides. Would you be able to share those with us, or is it not published yet that we have to be a little more cautious?
I think it's fine.
Okay.
I think the figures and I think it's fine.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure that will be very much appreciated. Before I go to the question about talking a little bit more about your new neuroaesthetics department or school, or I wanted to ask you if you could just talk a little bit about the evolutionary aspect of beauty.
Yeah, so I talk a fair amount about this in my book, and the general idea around evolutionary arguments for beauty is typically that anything that predisposes us to having to increasing reproductive success will be built into the population over time. One thing to keep in mind is these kinds of arguments are about how our brains evolved in the Pleistocene. So this is about a couple of million years going up to sometime about 12,000 years ago. And so it's worth recognizing that how this evolved in the brain may or may not apply to our current environment, even though it's embedded in our brains. So our brains tend to be behind the times in this sense. And by that, I mean that one of the features that is commonly cited for beauty tends to be symmetry. And one explanation for that is that infections with parasites, whether it's in plants or animals or humans, tend to affect symmetry. And so the idea is that symmetry was a signal to good health. And so people who tended to prefer symmetric bodies, symmetric faces, had a greater likelihood of having their genes passed on, right? That's a broad brush of that argument. Having said that, you probably realize that at least in the developed world, death by parasites is not a huge issue. I mean, with COVID now, I don't know how, whether we want to call, I mean, COVID is not a parasite, but apart from this past year, infectious disease deaths in much of the development world in a way that disfigures people is just not as much of an issue, but we're still left with the legacy of our old brain. And so there, the idea is that this evolution of beauty has to do with reproductive success, and that the markers of beauty are signals to someone's health. And that may be part of why there's this kind of conflation of values that, so health and morality and beauty all end up being tied together.
Does it surprise you that in our bubble chart that the beauty anti-aging sector is the largest?
It doesn't. I mean, maybe the first time I saw it, I was a little shocked at the sheer number of it. But I think it, in some ways, we're so preoccupied by physical beauty. And I will be curious what your panel thinks of whether this has gotten, how this has increased in the COVID era, just because so many of our meetings now are like this one. They're Zoom meetings, and mostly what you see are people's faces. People are being, I gave an interview for the Financial Times a while ago. Companies are interviewing people now rather than seeing them in person. And so the way people look takes on a disproportionate weight in people's judgments because you're not seeing everything else about them, at least not as easily.
And we will get to that. Very quickly, can you just tell us a little bit about the Penn Center for Neuroaesthetics? 2 years old, you started it, a big risk starting it. Can you just tell us about it? Because I think our industry should know about it, because this is really very cutting edge.
Sure. So as I mentioned, we approach aesthetics through vision. One can approach it through any sensory modality. So clearly music, and audition is a big area, but you can also think about fragrances and smell. I think, perfumes and botanicals are an area. You can think about it, taste and food. Anybody who does not appreciate the aesthetics of the pleasures of eating, I think is hard for me to envision. Let's put it that way. So, but we approach it through vision, and we're interested in faces, places, and things. And the broad questions we're asking are, what is the connection between beauty and morality when it comes to people? For places, what is the relationship between the built environment and wellness? And for things, you can imagine things could be consumer products, which we have not focused on very much, or art. And there is a core question that we are trying to address, which is, what does it mean to be engaged with art, and why? What is art good for, right? Why is a bunch of splatters of paint on a canvas not something you're going to eat, not something you're going to have sex with? Why do people care about this? Why do why do people spend a lot of money on it? And it's I think, a fundamental mystery, and we're trying to address that. And I think it has real practical consequences, which is when, at least in our public school system, when there are funding cuts, the first things to go in public school systems are art and music. And, in the early days of the pandemic, about a year ago now, our mayor, and I live in Philadelphia, our mayor, who's quite a progressive mayor, the first thing he did was cut the arts and culture program of the city budget. And so I think if you believe in the power and value of art, I think it's incumbent to try to demonstrate that to the non-believers. And that's why I was excited that the World Economic Forum decided that they want to really highlight arts and culture. So anyway, those are the three broad questions that we address. And then as a center, we have outreach to community organizations. We have an artist in residence right now, and basically trying to bridge this, what has been a cultural divide between the arts and the sciences.
Well, thank you. I'll just quote something from your letter in your last communication. The Penn Center for Neuroaesthetics has become the international leader of research examining and establishing the biological basis of aesthetic experiences. And I know that you're having impact globally, and it's only 2 years old. And so congratulations on taking that risk, because I remember talking with you about it when you were, you give up something that's kind of like known to do something, a little bit risky. But I just think that our industry can, get more involved and helpful, and because what you're doing is extremely valuable. So thank you for that. And now I'm going to shift to that question about what's changed in the beauty sector since COVID, which I think we're all interested in. And I'm going to start with you, Allison O'Neill, if you could unmute yourself. You are a beauty and lifestyle authority. You started the website Beauty Becomes You. And I thought we'd start with you because you kind of bridge this, the arena of what we were talking about with Dr. Chatterjee. And you particularly are focused on beauty and care for seniors. So Allison, why don't you weigh in on this conversation? You might need to unmute. Are you there? Is Allison there?
She's trying to unmute, but she's having an issue. So she's just giving us a 1 minute. Hang on. There she is.
Here I am. I apologize. I have two screens going and I couldn't get my arrow over. So technology.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Susie, very much. Yeah, I'm so delighted to be listening to Dr. Chatterjee. This is a great day when he gets to speak and I get to listen. I have been practicing in the fields of the psychology of appearance for 40 years. So it is a passion of mine, and to make me stay within the borders, I've written something. I'm going to just work from that script because I have such passion about this, and working with over 5,000 people through Beauty Becomes You, my charity, in the last 12 years, and more thousands in my practice. I want to share some practical perspective, specifically with the seniors. Let me paint a picture for you. Dr. Chatterjee, I didn't know you were going to be talking about arts and sciences, but the senior population in the US will soar to 80 million by 2025 and 96 million by 2060, with more than 1 billion people worldwide. So let me give you a little more look at the aging industry, because this is really critical. Some of the question that remains is this nature versus nurture. And as Dr. Chatterjee's studies are showing, that older adults actually have more of a concept of beauty and wellness than other groups. So aesthetics is French for the philosophy of beauty, to Dr. Chatterjee's point, so arts and cultures. And early on, two scientists, Burchard and Walster, did a study called What is Beautiful is Good, indicating, as Dr. Chatterjee said, good people are viewed as being more attractive. Better groomed children, other studies have shown this, receive higher grades. There's no studies to date, but theories lead to believe that better groomed senior adults are better cared for by caregivers. And no one can deny the value of personal care maintenance provided through good grooming and hygiene lifelong. Significant changes in the ability to maintain self-care are reflected in one's appearance. And that is across the board as long as we are alive. In the past year, the lack of accessibility led to recognizing the greater value of professional beauty services. Beyond superficial beautification, people experience the direct impact on their own and loved ones' personal health and hygiene. At senior living communities, unwashed and uncut hair, nail sensitivities, reduced bathing and assisted dressing due to fewer caregivers caused increased angst for seniors who were dependent on those providers. Used to routines like getting their hair done at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, they're common spots to gather and socialize, which is critical to our well-being. On-site hair salons shut down on a population who are instilled with the belief that it is always important to dress for other people out of respect. And they admit that they feel their best for doing so. A significant increase on do-it-yourself and online resources helps some of them, but isolation, which is common occurrence even prior to COVID, was magnified and led to heightened reports of depression. Failure to thrive syndrome has grown, influencing decisions to not take medications, order their meals, or get up and get dressed for no one but themselves, diminish their desire to live. It's mental health. Yes.
Right. Thank you, Allison. And I just want to ask you one question about the thing that you mentioned in this article that you had written for Skin Inc. about the Alzheimer's patients and their hair appointments. Yeah. Can you talk about that? I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah. You know, again, I think it is such a strong point for your question today, and I was just going to include that. But this is not about vanity. It's about identity. And speaking to that, with the Alzheimer's patients we have worked with, we always have family members, and we've had numerous families come and say, my mother doesn't remember our names, but she remembers that her hair appointment is at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday. And if we don't have studies yet in this population to really indicate the power of this, but these people who are 55 and older today, which are in the senior community, we remember when people got dressed to go on planes, they got dressed to go to the shows, they got dressed to go to the mall or go grocery shopping and even to their mailbox. And they did it not because they felt better for themselves. They did it because there was a place in society and a respect for other people that they were trained that this represented. So going for your hair appointment or having your personal care provider come and give you a bath and dress you when you have neuropathy in your hands and you can no longer button a shirt. You can't see to do the things that you need to be able to, that we take for granted. Last year was so brilliant to me because when I couldn't go get my nails done and I have eczema, I felt the pain of my hands and I was able to empathize even more greatly with the seniors who are doing things that live with pain daily and need the support. But this never leaves. This week I was at a memorial service, and this is part of what I wanted to share with you, for a 96-year-old man whose wife stood up with her walker. She had a yellow jacket on and a smart skirt and you know, sturdy shoes. But she said, I want you to know that every day, and I don't know her from Adam, but this was her talk. She said, my husband asked me when he was in the last days of his life, do you still have that bracelet? Would you mind wearing it? Do you have that shirt that I gave you? How about getting your hair done? She said, this is the first time, you know, in the last couple of weeks that he was alive, I went and got my hair done and I really coiffed so that he would, and he appreciated it so much. This is what is important to older adults. It is a core part of who they are.
Allison, thank you so much for that. And you know, I think it's a very good example. Dr. Chatterjee, when I speak with him, he is always talking about research and the importance of it. And it is so important. But the anecdotal stories of what we all experience, and you with the Alzheimer's and so on, those are important clues too. So that's why I think the two worlds getting together is going to be fantastic. Anita Murray, if you are there, can you just unmute? You are in Ireland and you are in the salon arena. Tell us what you are seeing, what's changing in the beauty sector since COVID. Anita? You might need to unmute. Is she there?
She is. Anita, will you unmute? Bottom left.
Sorry, I lost connection there. Is that myself, Susie? I didn't get the last sentence. I was frozen.
Yes, I mentioned that you represent a lot of people in the salon industry in Ireland. And so the question is, what's changed in the beauty sector since COVID? And if you can maybe just list some things, you know, in the interest of time, we'd love to hear from you.
Great. Many thanks, Susie. I'm really pleased to contribute today. This is something I'm really interested in for many years, and I think COVID has really accelerated an inevitable collision of beauty and wellness. So I think beauty previously fell solidly under general grooming heading. So typically services exclusive to the beauty salon business model, but we've noticed a growing demand for beauty services in the spa and wellness setting. And these treatments have become part of a self-care ritual and an essential part of maintaining self-esteem, a desire for healthy self-image, which has been hugely impacted with the amount of time we've spent in front of screens, forced to view footage of ourselves in endless Zoom meetings. The lipstick effect has evolved, or above the mask now, which is the mascara effect, as it will probably become to be known. An old theory, as everyone's probably familiar with when facing an economic crisis, that consumers will be more willing to buy less costly luxury items. So instead of buying expensive clothing, for example, the consumer buys lipstick or an eye cream from the same brand. And this is now underpinned by the consumer's desire to still treat themselves in a crisis, and even if these are small luxuries. So people want to feel good about themselves, and this is responsible for the increased demand for beauty services like manicure, pedicure, brow and eye enhancements, even sunless tanning. Beauty is a source of confidence and contentment that I believe is directly linked to wellness. And I think now more than ever, it's more than skin deep. And the interconnection and the influence of wellness on brand development and our appearance and our inner being, I think is only beginning.
Anita, thank you for that. And I was very interested in one thing that you said, and I just want to challenge all of us to check with ourselves. A lot of people who are doing Zoom are thinking about how they look, sometimes more so than the content of the meeting.
Yeah.
I have to say that's probably true for me too.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anita. You
Thank
really
you.
brought up the importance. And by the way, Dr. Chatterjee, we're hearing the term self-care a lot more in general in both the beauty and the wellness arena. That is a little bit new in the last few years. Jamie Vasquez from Natura Bissé International. If you could unmute, and you sent me some interesting things about what you are seeing in the beauty sector that has changed since COVID that I think a lot of people can relate to.
Yes, thank you. It's pronounced Jaime for everyone who's on. There's three areas that have been really most impactful from my lens. One is a much higher focus on e-commerce. The second one is really trying to manage and motivate teams. I've always practiced servant leadership, and as a result, I try to manage by walking around, which is an old term from the 80s. That is not possible today. We have a limited workforce here in the office, and I have teams in Mexico and across the Americas. So Zoom, Teams has become critical to that. And then finally, the doctor spoke about empirical data and the importance of validating your hypotheses with this data, which he did very nicely. But because we can't do focus groups, I've had to default to leveraging social media to do a lot of my industry and customer research. I think the biggest change for us as a company, and the family's been really smart about this, is the founder, Don Ricardo, Veronica's dad, Patricia's dad, really started this company based on what some of you who are psychologists here know, what we learned in Psych 101, which is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's that hierarchy of needs that has taken us in this industry to develop not just products, but really a lifestyle. And so we've gone from really selling very expensive, very efficacious products to now launching a new line called Diamond Well Living, which speaks to, if you can envision a Venn diagram, external beauty and internal beauty, which then delivers wellness in the center, which delivers peace, which is really Maslow's self-actualization, which in the end creates a mental and physical homeostasis. So I think that whole evolution from the physical to the mental, which is something that the doctor spoke about, is something that has really changed. And it's interesting, if you go back to 19th century American literature and Emerson, Thoreau, and the Transcendentalists, they all spoke about the marriage of the physical with the mental and how that really helped the person self-actualize. So that is the evolution I've seen, and it's great to be on this journey with the family because they completely understand it. So it's not just been, a workforce change, it's really been an ecosystem change.
Thank you. That is a very good point. And, you brought up the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it reminds me of something Veronica Schreibus, who heads up our Global Wellness Institute, Wellness for Architecture and Design, or Wellness through Architecture and Design. She mentioned about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs that years ago, you would build structures that just, had 4 walls and a window, because it was very important for shelter. And then we move up the hierarchy, and then self-esteem becomes, and we have the mega mansions and people doing all kinds of, exciting things. But then we're getting a little higher into the self-actualization part, as you mentioned. And this is where she talked about numinous, the idea of something beyond just self-esteem, look at me, but something that touches me, transforms me. So I think you're right. Companies that are thinking a little bit broader about beauty, not just, how much they can sell. But I think that, in our world, in our spa and wellness world, I think that's the case for a lot of those companies. So
if I may add one point to that, what's really interesting, this manifested itself for me. You talked about the mansions and self-actualization and self-esteem. I was recently in Mexico, and you have your old palatial resorts, and then you have this incredible resort called the One and Only Mandarina, which if you're out on your yacht, out in the water, you cannot see from the ocean because they're villas that are built into the jungle. So as opposed to yachts arriving to, these grand palatial casino-like resorts in Monaco, they're pulling up to this place where self-actualization is actually going back into nature and living a minimalist style. The smart people, the wealthy smart people are, they never flaunt. It's the millionaire next door, right? They are looking for that.
And I think that's a very good point. And I think your point about nature, that is really the most beautiful. I want to go to Anna Morato, if she is on now, because she had some boom, interesting ideas about what's happening since in the beauty sector since COVID. Anna, are you there?
I am. Hi. Thanks so much. Hi.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Anne. I'm the content director for 2 media brands in the professional beauty sector. So my audience is that professional beauty practitioner, the hairdresser, the makeup artist, the nail technician, the esthetician. So I'm concerned about the ways COVID impacted them and their livelihoods, because the professional salon industry was devastated through COVID. We had the lockdowns, COVID concerns. How do you do someone's hair 6 feet apart? So these are caregivers really first. You don't necessarily go into this industry without a giving heart. You want to touch people, you want to send them away happy, and you want to send them away transformed. But we've seen a lot of clients not return to salons. That sort of low maintenance COVID look might become the norm for them. We also know that stylists, hairdressers, nail technicians can't double book because of COVID restrictions. A big trend that I had mentioned to Susie is that many beauty practitioners are leaving salon environments, leaving group environments, and are moving to suite one-on-one environments where they can work just with their client. So this is what we call going independent, moving into a suite or rental situation. It's not legal in all of the United States, but many on the coasts are doing it. We do a lot of bespoke surveys. We did a survey recently on this independent model and found that 53% of respondents said their number of clients increased when they went independent. And we continue to see that despite the fact that their service hours are greatly reduced, they're actually finding a little bit of ease and comfort in the fact that they can get some lunch. They can, you know, run to the bathroom where before they were double booking and running off their feet. But as I say, I have a kind of unique perspective in that I'm looking at that practitioner. I'm looking at that person that we don't always think about, but we thought about them when we couldn't get our hair cut or colored or our nails done. I loved what Allison said. So thank you very much. It's been lovely to be part of
Thank you,
this.
Anne. And I also noticed that you had mentioned that some practitioners are charging for time rather than service. And a lot of them, like you said, are going independent. I'm going to take the last minute and just list for you a list of things that people sent to me and that Beth, our researcher, also about things that have changed. Virtual practices now, self-care, immunity, skin immunity, maskne, acne and masks, antimicrobial products, at-home beauty, virtual classes, beauty coaching, mushrooms and skincare, men and cosmetics, a surge in beauty brands by and for Black and brown populations, more diversity and inclusion, activist beauty brands taking a stand, natural clean products, personalization, digital, e-commerce, influencers, services up now, 70% products, 30% services, blurring of categories, beauty supplements, non-invasive cosmetics. And I'll end on this note, the company called Youthphoria, reclaiming the fun associated with applying makeup. So they are talking about enhancement, from enhancement to enjoyment. Thank you all. Dr. Chatterjee, thank you very much. Thank you all for being on the call. Please add anything in chat, what you're seeing, and we'll share it with everyone. And I've learned a lot today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Feel free to unmute and offer some.
Thank you.
Love.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks very much. Great.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was awesome.